It's 1904. It's a Wednesday, the 17th of February, and Giacomo Puccini's Madama Butterfly is premiering at the La Scala in Milan. It is now 90 years later. Frontman of Weezer, Rivers Cuomo, growing tired of the rock lifestyle and playing the same songs over and over, has made a habit of listening to Madama Butterfly every night while touring for the Blue Album. Quoted as such, the depth of emotion and sadness and tragedy in the opera, it really was calling to me. Like, come on Rivers, you can go there. You can go much further with your music than the Sweater Song or Buddy Holly. In an attempt to further his art, Cuomo worked with his fellow bandmates to produce their second album, a more abrasive set, looking in on his own dark side, and he chose to name it after the deuteragonist of Madama Butterfly, B.F. Pinkerton. Okay, so hello, welcome to the actual video. I decided to make this video because I think it's fairly well known why Pinkerton is named that way, but I haven't really seen much info online pointing out the actual connections. Now this won't be some massive deep dive into each song, it's more so just skimming through the standard version of the album, which unfortunately means no deluxe songs. Well, first of all, I thought I'd just look at the very clear outright references, starting off with the most obvious element, Pinkerton. The album is outright named after a character from Madama Butterfly, being B.F. Pinkerton as mentioned in the intro. Although seemingly a surface level connection, it's quite an interesting character to take a namesake from, but that's more so something for later on. Some more surface level stuff can be seen on the actual physical album. The CD features lyrics from the opera in Italian. Everywhere in the world, the roving Yankee takes his pleasure in his profit. Indifferent to all risk, he drops an anchor at random. Then, behind the CD tray, or included with the vinyl as a poster, is a map of a fictional Isola della Farfalla e Penisola di Cane. That's probably right. There's a ship named USS Pinkerton, alongside various other references to important figures surrounding the band, which I'll just sort of flash on screen now. It's actually something I have myself that I got with the vinyl. It's pretty cool. Some more surface level stuff is the whole Japanese theming of the album, although it's fairly likely this is just more related to Rivers' obsession with Japan over a connection with the opera itself. There's the album art. It's an edited version of Kambara Yorino Yuki from the Japanese ukiyo-e artist Hiroshige. It's from his 1830 series 53 Stations of Tokaido. In the actual songs, there's basically an endless amount of references to Japan. It's not really worth getting into too much detail with, especially since, like I said, it's not inherently connected to Madama Butterfly, although there is the line mentioning Cho-Cho-san and El Scorcho. Now onto a bit more of an in-depth analysis, we return to the album's namesake. River himself is called Pinkerton an asshole American sailor similar to a touring rock star, finding him a symbol of a part of himself he was trying to come to terms with. Pinkerton in the play is an extraordinarily selfish person. He marries a young Japanese Cho-Cho-san purely for convenience with the plan to abandon her for an American wife when he finds one. He eventually leaves for 3 years, and when he returns with his aforementioned American wife, he finds Cho-Cho-san's house lovingly decorated for his return, at which point he runs away in cowardice and regret. Then, throughout the album Pinkerton, we can see how blatantly lustful Rivers is. Multiple songs like Tired of Sex and Across the Sea being the most notable examples, although I feel like going over that aspect is somewhat redundant. If you're watching this video, you've definitely listened to the album. Everyone knows the album is really horny. The only maybe specifically notable example I'd say is Across the Sea. Rivers lusting over a teenage Japanese fan somewhat parallels Pinkerton's lust for Cho-Cho-san, and in my opinion you can kind of see some similarity with the reasons they fell in love. Rivers sort of fell for the fan because of the simple fact that he was really lonely at the time, and then he received a fan letter, and that somewhat reflects Pinkerton only marrying Cho-Cho-san for convenience. The reasons for wanting a connection being a purely superficial reason and not real genuine love. But, you know, that connection is a bit of a stretch. It probably wasn't fully intended. Guilt is definitely a more prominent theme throughout the album, near every song having at least one line apologising. Granted, this is fairly dissimilar to BF Pinkerton, who only really has one real revelation at the end that makes him feel his guilt. But again, this goes hand in hand with Rivers not actually being this sort of person. As he said, he's trying to come to terms with that part of himself, but that's not his entirety. What absolutely is notable is the comparison in the final verse of Butterfly. After declaring he'll return when the robin makes his nest, a line lifted from the play itself, and the fact he's not actually returning, he repeats his sorry 3 times. The ultimate lines of the album being apologies and guilt, just as Madama Butterfly ends in Pinkerton wrapped up in his guilt. Granted, in the play he does marry a 15-year-old girl, causes her to commit suicide, so, you know, he probably deserves a bit worse than just his guilt. But I do think, you know, it's pretty interesting how both the play and the album both end with the character, or Rivers in this case, being wrapped up in their guilt and, you know, trying to make things right. Although in the play, Pinkerton doesn't succeed. By the time he's tried to make things right, Cho-Cho-san has already committed suicide. Speaking on Butterfly, we have another pretty obvious connection. The play is called Madama Butterfly, and this song is called Butterfly. Duh, it's, you know, pretty obvious. Alongside the name, I think the song is very obviously connected to the story of the play. It follows Rivers catching a butterfly and realizing that he caused the harm without knowing. Not meaning to do any harm, going along with what his body had told him to do. Similarly to how Pinkerton catches Cho-Cho-san in a marriage, ultimately causing her such great misery without realizing until it's too late. And as mentioned previously, the final lines are lifted directly from the play. I told you I would return when the robin makes his nest. I think this is the most direct connection between Rivers and Pinkerton. We see how Rivers has lived this aforementioned selfish rocker life that he saw Pinkerton had lived, roaming around, having sex, disappearing without a care in the world. But what separates these two people is Rivers hated this life. We see him constantly begging for forgiveness, and with Butterfly he's looking back at the harm he's caused and apologises for it all. Well, yeah, they both lied about returning when the robin makes his nest. Rivers admits it and begs for forgiveness, whereas Pinkerton waited until Cho-Cho-san has already died to finally accept he'd done any wrong. Personally, I think Pinkerton ends up being the perfect character for the album to be named after. It ties so perfectly into the themes, this asshole-ish selfish life that Rivers had to grapple with, being paralleled by Pinkerton's roving Yankee lifestyle. But what makes the comparison so interesting to me is how they eventually do pull apart. While Pinkerton, we don't know how he ended up living after the end of the play, but we do see how it took him until his ex-wife killing herself, his ex-teen wife killing herself. He does realise he did wrong, but Rivers, he also saw this path of destruction he left, and he also begins apologising. But we see throughout the entire album how he's apologising. He doesn't wait until the very end. And as I said, he actually admits he lied about returning, unlike Pinkerton, who never really had the courage to do so. He was pathetic until the very end. While I can't say Rivers became some saint because, well, obviously I don't know him, he does realise he has to start changing, examining himself with this deeply personal album where he comes to accept he's sorry for the way he's lived. And well, that's that. There's definitely more that I probably missed. Definitely missed a lot of, well, maybe not a lot of stuff off the looks, but you know, there's probably a bit more I could have added, but I'm not very, this is my first time making a video discussing music. It's the first video essay for sure. The first video I made was just a ranking. That's obviously a very different format. So obviously it's kind of different. I'm not very experienced. I think I actually fixed the audio mixing, so it shouldn't all be coming up on one ear. So, you know, at least I've definitely improved in that way. If you did notice anything I missed, any interesting connections, do make sure to tell me, because I want to know. It's one of my favorite albums, so knowing more, learning about it, that's always fun. But for now, that's definitely it. I really appreciate you watching, and I hope you did enjoy what I had to say, even though maybe it wasn't entirely coherent and can't even speak. I hope you did enjoy. That's the main thing I want to say.
to know